this is where I want to go here, Jeff. Now we've kind of in season review form still. As we move along here, we're not quite into Senior Bowl and draft stuff, so we are going to start with some of that as we move ahead here. So let's, for now, take a look at the Giants' offense today. I dug a little bit deep here at some of the stats over the course of the year. And look, I don't want to make this just a numbers-heavy, number-centric show, because the fans know a lot of these already, because we've talked about them a lot. And frankly, they're not good, and we know they're not good. The Giants, 31st in yards per game, 31st in points per game. In terms of passing, 29th in passing yards per game, passing yards per play. Their rush game was a little bit better. They were ranked 19th in rush yards per game, 13th in rush yards per play. So overall, the offense not as productive as you want it to be, obviously. But, Jeff, I want to focus on a couple specific stats that I think had a lot to do with the reasons as to why this offense wasn't as effective as you needed it to be. And I'm going to start in an area where I know there's a lot of optimism for fans, though I don't think we saw the production in that area this year where you needed it to be for this offense to be successful, and that's the offensive line, and specifically the pass protection. If you take a look at the Giants and where they finished this year, they allowed 50 sacks, only 3 teams allowed more, and they allowed...
Who were those? Do we know?
I can check that for you. I don't have it
okay.
offhand.
I just didn't know if you had those, the other two, who they were. But.
I can get that for you, and that's going to be a later part of the conversation here.
Yep.
And then the other part of that, all right, you say sacks are fluky, it's a stat that varies a lot. Yeah, I agree with that. Well, they also allowed a 40.5% pressure rate. And what that means, folks, is that on 40.5% of the Giants' pass plays, they allowed pressure on Daniel Jones. That can come in the form of a sack, a quarterback hit, or a quarterback hurry. That's via Pro Football Focus. Only one team had a higher pressure rate than the New York Football Giants. So those two numbers, Jeff, to me, is really the center of why this season never got going offensively. If you can't trust your line to protect your quarterback, this thing's not going to go well.
Yeah, because that Daniel Jones was pressured all season. Even last year was, teams go after him. Now, why? Well, the answer is right there in front of you. Teams believe that not only can they get to the quarterback sometimes with just 4, but their offensive line was a problem area that they attacked on a game in and game out basis. And so when you don't have an offensive line to protect the quarterback and consistently are getting pressured because of it, then that's why these numbers are where they are now. And by the way, if the Giants decide to pass on first or second down, and most likely putting you in those third down situations where you have to pass, if you get a sack or a pressure or things like that, teams are going to pressure you consistently. And the Giants, teams knew what you were going to do in certain situations, and running the football always could help that. But John, to your point, teams know that they could rattle around Daniel Jones, get him to turn the football over, and the Achilles heel is that offensive line and pass protection. They did better in run protection, run blocking, but I'm sure the number's better in run than it is pass.
And by the way, they were ranked 29th, but they were tied with 3 teams ranked at 29th with the 2 other teams, Washington and Houston, Jeff. They both allowed 50 as well, which means only one team allowed more sacks than the Giants, and that was the Philadelphia Eagles. So this gets to the other point here. If you look at the teams, and I'll give you the pressure rates as well for this number, but if you look at the teams that allowed the most sacks in the league, Philly, 65. Washington, 50. Giants, 50. Houston, 50. Seattle, 48. They're the outlier there, but they have Russell Wilson. Bengals, 48. Jaguars, 44. Cowboys, 44. Jets, 43. Lions, 42. Falcons, 41. Niners, 39. Vikings, 39. Patriots, 37. How many playoff teams have I named there, Jeff? And that's to about 14 teams, and I've named 2 playoff teams. I named Washington, who only made the playoffs because they were in the NFC East.
Because they had to.
And the Seattle Seahawks.
Yeah.
No other team in the bottom 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 15 teams in the league in sacks allowed. 2 of them made the playoffs. Now I'll give you pressure rate very quickly, and I think we'll find that the numbers are very similar. So if you look at this is pressure rate allowed by offenses, okay, over the course of this year. And I think I have it over here. I'm working on two different computers here, Jeff. So if you take a look at the pressure rates for teams offensively, okay, the only team that allowed a higher pressure rate than the New York Giants, the New York Jets, 46%. Then I'm going to go down the road here. Here we go. Stop me when you hear a playoff team mentioned.
Okay.
Eagles, Chargers, Vikings, Seahawks. That's the same exception that we had to the last one, right? Houston, Denver, Baltimore. But again, why is their pressure rate high? Because Lamar Jackson runs around and holds the ball, right? Makes sense. Atlanta, Jacksonville, San Francisco, Buffalo. What does Buffalo have? A quarterback that runs around and tries to make plays, right? Las Vegas, Cincinnati, Tennessee. Same deal. You get a bunch of teams there in the bottom 13. You got 3 playoff teams I mentioned. So if you can't protect your quarterback, and we're looking at sacks and pressure right there, it's going to be extremely difficult to win football games in the National Football League. And by the way, Jeff, it's not like the Giants were behind big in a ton of these games. Mm-hmm. They were in a few late, but early on, even though they were losing, it was only a 1-2 score game in the fourth quarter of these games. So it's not like they were put in these terrible must-pass situations all the time. So I don't think this is a deal where this stat is really that affected by game flow necessarily. So this is the number that, to me, that has to get better. And it starts here. There are other things we'll get into and talk about. But I think everything we're going to talk about gets impacted by these numbers. The pressure rate, the sack rate, the total number of sacks, they're right near the bottom of the league. Until that gets better, we're not going to see this offense get out of that bottom 25% of the league in any of these significant statistical categories.
Yeah, because, you can't, you ask your quarterback to perform at a high level, and whatever those numbers, completion percentage, interceptions, statistics like that, if you ask your quarterback to, provide you with a high percentage of good statistics, when you don't have an offensive line to protect you, then you're not going to get those. And so you have to basically go back and start to change your thinking of how you're going to throw the football, quick hitters and not be able to take advantage of any of the long balls because you can't get protection. Now, I would imagine that, and I know this is a lot of work, and, for somebody that wants to do it, go ahead. But, you look at the Giants in particular who we're talking about and divide it up into quarters of the season. I would be curious to see where the third and the fourth quarters come in and the first and second quarters come in as far as those sacks and pressure rates.
I can actually check that for you very quickly here, Jeff.
Hopefully you do see somewhat of a trend where it's gotten better at times. I would say that probably I'm going to guess the third quarter was the end of the third to the start of the fourth quarters of the season where the Giants ran into that losing streak again. That was a bad area.
All right, so here's what I'm going to do. The Giants, they cracked their losing streak at week 6 against Washington, right? And so why don't we start there? We'll start there. If we take out, Jeff, the first 5 weeks of the year where the Giants started 0-5 and they really struggled, right? If you look at their pressure percentage after 5 weeks, the Giants were 26 out of 32 teams at 37% pressure rate. Now, if you want to go a little bit deeper into the season, let's go through.
That's the first 5, you said?
That's taking out the first 5 games of the year. All right? Now, let's say we do the same thing and we take out. Bye week was what, week 10 or 11 this year, Jeff, for the Giants?
I don't know. It was late. So one of the last ones, right?
All right. So if you just take out, I went from week 10 onwards here.
Okay.
And I took a look at that. If you go from week 10 onwards, the Giants were 22nd in pressure rate. Okay? It's going down now. So let's go even further here. Let's look at just the final quarter of the season.
Yeah.
The final 4 games, if you want to look at it that way, okay? If you look at the final 4 games of the year, the Giants were ranked in terms of pressure percentage allowed. Stand by. Come on, computer. There we go. 27th. So at the end of the year, you didn't necessarily get that bump that you wanted to look at. So you did see some improvement over the course of the year, but it's still not where you want it to be.
But if we want to try to ask the question why, I think that when the running game was going, those 5 or 6 games in a row where the Giants were rushing over 100 yards a game, the rushing attack was working, play action was working, teams were not pinning their ears back because they had to respect the run. I think that's where all of a sudden you saw that goes from 27th to 22, I think it was you said.
Yeah.
And so you do get an improvement. The running game goes away. Guess what happens? Now all of a sudden you're on your third downs and even your second and longs. You now are forcing to pass. Teams are going to come after you again. So really the common denominator, in my opinion, is the run game. That has to do a lot with the pressure, and also the ability to pressure Daniel Jones into turning the football over. Now he did a better job at times during the season. And I think that's when guys lay off, when Daniel Jones can show the rest of the league that pressure isn't going to bother him. I mean, you look at Justin Herbert and guys like, rookie, other guys that he's like one of the best passers under pressure. So some guys can manage that, but Daniel Jones not. He's not very good at it right now.
Now, Jeff, I looked at it during from week 6 to 13 when the Giants went 5-2.
Okay.
That was that 7-game stretch that they went 5-2. The Giants ranked 21st in pressure rate, down to 35%, which is basically like a 5% drop. If you just look at their 4-game winning streak from weeks 9 to 13, if that's a better guide, they're all the way down to 12th in the league, 29% pressure rate. So those things sync up pretty well.
Sure.
Where when they're winning games, the pressure rate goes down. When they're losing games, the pressure rate goes up. Now, this is the interesting thing that I looked at. And for the folks that don't know, I looked up something that's called DVOA. It's basically an advanced metric that puts your opponent, situation, schedule, and all that stuff, into consideration when they determine how well you did this year based on everything that was going against you. And they had the Giants ranked as the 24th best offense in the league. And I figured, wait a second, with all these other ranks between like 29th and 32nd, why would they be 24th? And then I started looking specifically at the strength of schedule here. And I kind of started here, and then I advanced past this, Jeff. According to Football Outsiders, who tracks that DVOA stat, the Giants had the toughest schedule for any offense in the National Football League this year.
For any offense.
They faced,
against those defenses, yeah.
They faced the toughest defensive schedule. And this goes specifically to this first point we're talking about, right? If you look at, and I track this for every single team. I can send you the spreadsheet. This is what I was doing this morning. If you take a look at the opponents and where they were ranked in terms of number of sacks this year over the course of the season, I'll give you pressure rate too. The Giants faced, Jeff, listen to this, the top team in sacks, the second best team in sacks, the third best team in sacks twice. That was the Eagles. They also faced the fourth best team in sacks. They also faced the fifth best team in sacks. They also faced the sixth best team in sacks twice. That's Washington. I'm not even joking.
You're almost at a half the season where you're in the top 3 or 4 rush defenses.
They faced the seventh best team in sacks. So literally the top 7 teams, Jeff, in the league in the total sacks this year, the Giants played all 7. And 2 of those teams, they played twice.
Yeah.
So do the math there. And the other teams, by the way, just to give you an idea, the Bears were 17th, Dallas was 19th, the Browns were 15th, the Ravens were 14th, the Seahawks were 13th. So the only team that they played that was in the bottom third of the league were the Bengals at 31. The Niners at 21 were still in that second third, just barely. All right, that's sacks. All right, you say sacks are fluky. Fine. All right, let's look at pressure rate. Guess what? The Giants played the top team in pressure rate. They played the third best team in pressure rate. They played the fourth best team in pressure rate twice. They played the sixth best team in pressure rate. They played the seventh best team in pressure rate. They played the ninth best team in pressure rate twice. Then they also played the 12th best, the 13th best, the 16th best. If you look at the overall average rank, Jeff, in terms of sacks per attempt and sacks per game, 10th. That was the average rank of teams that they played this year. Keep in mind you play 14 teams. So literally the best it could be is like 7th, all right? Because you play 13 teams during the year. So in terms of pressure rate, it also came out to around between 10th and 12th, depending on how you want to average it out. So in terms of opponents this year, the Giants played, in my opinion, and you could probably compare it to the other NFC East teams, and it would be similar because they have similar schedules, obviously.
Right.
And no surprise that those three teams finished in the bottom of the league in pressure rate and sacks. The Giants played maybe the toughest the toughest schedule, period, this year in terms of opponent pass rush, which I found interesting.
And the other thing that's interesting, on a good note, okay, then the only thing I can say good about any of that is that when you have Lemieux, okay, Thomas, and you have Pert, okay, guys that are, and let's throw Nick Gates in there at a center position that he's never played before. All of those guys are able to gain experience from playing against those types of teams. So, you can talk a little bit about that. Probably one of the reasons why those numbers are so bad is because they are, a young group. So I'm trying to, the glass is a little half full for me in that sense.
Yeah, I would look at it this way. Maybe the overall numbers aren't necessarily as bad as they look based on the schedule the team had to play, is my point.
Yeah. But we kind of knew going into the season when we first started to break down the schedule how difficult this first 5 games was going to be, especially starting off with Pittsburgh and the type of sacks monsters those guys are. I mean, Pittsburgh leads the league in sacks almost every single year.
Yeah.
And so, but I guess to me, you got to look at the experience these guys got and how are you going to fix this? Well, another year and some continuity will help. I think the big thing is that the Giants have to self-scout and go back, and this is what the coaches will do in the offseason. You know this, John. They then go back and break down film on every single one of these and give reports to the head coach because they got to understand where they're going as far as free agency and the draft. You don't want to keep these guys or what's going to happen. But those are some, it's interesting because sometimes a lot of people don't like statistics and metrics and all that kind of stuff, but it does tell a little bit of, in today's world, it does tell you a little bit of a tale of the tape. And you can kind of, gather your own information, if you will, and just come up with your own opinion on why it didn't work. And in my opinion, the good thing about it is that these guys got a lot of experience from it. They got their butts kicked a lot. But, I mean, I think that Andrew Thomas was a guy that, you want to put a pin on him. He got much better as the season went along, and that's a positive.
Yeah, and I guess I want to get to the calls, Jeff, but I think
sure.
I at least want to finish the offensive line part of this conversation
sure.
first. And I'll ask it to you first because you just brought it up, and then I'll give you my opinion.
Yep.
Of the guys and the individuals we're talking about in the group right now that are on the roster going into next year.
Okay.
You can maybe put them in order if you want, however you want to do it. What's your level of confidence in each one of these guys that they're a long-term starter moving forward?
Well,
Who do you feel best about?
Well, I feel best about the left tackle being the long-term guy. I also think that I'll tell you what, I'll give you them in order. I think long-term, number one would be the left tackle. Okay, Andrew Thomas. I think that long-term for the Giants, I think that Nick Gates will be a long-term. I think he's just going to get better.
I agree with both of those. That would be my first 2 on my list too.
Okay. Mm-hmm. The third one is a difficult one for me, and I'm gonna do this because I feel like there's more potential. That he got a little playing time this year, not a lot, but I think that potential is there for long term, and that would be Matt Pert.
Ooh, interesting. Okay, I like that.
Now Lemieux has to show me something. He was very inconsistent this year, and,
I agree.
and deservingly so. I mean, he was a 5th-round draft pick, a guy that was, he won the starting job, played 11 games, and that's a guy that I think is a little bit more of it's going to take a little bit longer. Zeitler, I don't know what's going to – he's consistent. He's a veteran, a guy that's going to be in there. So there's your start. There's your 5 guys. Now, Fleming, I don't know where he's going to be next year or what have you, but I don't see him as a long-term because I think I see him getting replaced. And then the backups, I can barely name the backups, to be honest with you. So
all right, so Jeff, let me put it this way. The only 2 guys, I'll be honest with you, and maybe I'm selling them short here a little bit, that I have a high level of confidence in based on what I've already seen, that they are going to be quality NFL starters for a long time. And I'm going to take Zeitler out of it because he's a veteran, and we know what he is. We know he's a quality NFL starter, right? The only guys that showed me enough this year to feel really good about them moving forward, and I'll just use the phrase really good, are Thomas and Gates.
Mm-hmm.
I still need to see more from the other guys, and that includes Parrott, Lemieux, and Will Hernandez, to be quite honest with you. I think we need to see more from those three guys before we can anoint them. Okay, we know these guys are long-term starters. I think you hope that they are. You think they can develop into that, but I don't think we know that yet. I feel pretty darn good about Thomas and Gates, though. How good are those guys going to be? It's a different question. But will I think they're going to be, legit NFL starters? For me, the answer is yes.
Both of them played every game, right? I mean, so, yeah, right? I think Nick Gates, I know that
they
Thomas,
both did. Yep.
So, yeah, I agree with you there. Here's the other, I guess, the other point to this. And I don't know what's the situation is with Googe and with the
good point too.
Wilkinson, the back, the assistant special or offensive line coach. So I don't know where that's going. If there's going to be a new offensive line coach or Googe is going to be the guy, I don't know that. So that to me is a very important characteristic to what you and I just talked about, because I feel like that needs to have some consistency to it to have a long-term effect on those guys that we just talked about. And so my next one, and I'll end it with this real quickly because I know we got to get to the callers. To me, it's the development of those of your depth that I want to see in that offensive line this year. I know who the starters are going to be next year there. I think Will Hernandez is a guy that's going to have to prove himself. I think the time is running out on him. So
he's only got 1 year left on his rookie contract, right? So
right. Yeah. So I feel like that's kind of one of those things. Show me, what you're probably not going to renew his. Well, he's a second rounder, so this is it.
This is it.
Right?
Yep. There is just to the fans though, there is no 5th year option for second round picks, only first round picks.
So I think that so the coaching thing is an unknown, but I think the consistent one that you and I both agree on is those two positions, and I think that getting a good quality backup at center would be something that I would like to see going into the season in 21. Maybe a guy that can be a swing guy that can play guard and center, but predominantly is a center by trade.
Yeah.
So
and the other thing, Jeff, too, they have to handle the blitz better, the offensive line.
But
that's something they really struggle. And you mentioned maybe it's youth.
Twist.
And maybe it has to do with youth and changing offensive line coaches and all that stuff. But just to give you a number, Giants quarterbacks this year against the blitz had a quarterback rating of 71. That is the 3rd worst in the NFL. Mm-hmm. So we don't know. I don't have the sack numbers there and what percentage of the times you get sacked based on blitzes. I don't have that metric. But look, we saw it, right? When teams are able to quote you, pin your ears back, and, we saw the Ravens send all the corners, the Cardinals send a bunch of corners in those games late in the year, and that gave this line a lot of problems. That's something else they need to get better at, and that's pre-snap communication, right? Identifying the mic, knowing where the pressure is going to come from, and all that stuff. And that goes to the quarterback too, as well as Nick Gates. All of them working together to handle the blitz better as a group. That's also a big part of this, as much as it is winning one-on-ones, is understanding who's coming from where and blocking it up.
And it's more of a big part than rather than just go and look at the schedule next year and say, oh, look at who the guys are playing next year.
Yeah,
this isn't a heavy
scheme.
You can't do that. This is still the NFL. This is a copycat league, week in, week out. Until you fix what the other teams are dominating you with,
Bingo.
You're going to see it every week. You're going to see it every week. Now, I just feel like, that the scheme or technique, the offensive coordinator, the offensive line coach, things like that.